Gary Eisenberg is an immigration lawyer and an expert on extradition, or is that deportation, or both? Gary, good afternoon to you. Appreciate the time this afternoon. So, I thought this application was going to turn on whether it was an extradition, in other words, we had gone to Tanzania and asked for Magudumana, or a deportation, in other words, Tanzania said, we're kicking you out and we have to take her because she's coming home. The judge then finding that she actually wanted to return home, considering she had made an application. That's quite a surprising finding, that she wanted to come home.
Yes. Well, the respondent's version was accepted, and she never contradicted the respondent's version, which had it that she had consented to her ride back to South Africa to see her children. That version was never contradicted. And the whole question of whether a person in Dr. Nandipha's position under those circumstances gives a consent to a deportation, whether or not it was a disguised extradition, that is a hole in the cheese. And context, factual context, turns out to be everything. A judge looks at the entire matrix of facts and decides, is this a person I want to help or not? And in this particular case, this is a judge, a rule of law judge, extremely fine judge with a good track record, and it's going to be up to Dr. Nandipha's legal team to look very closely at the way this judge has arrived at his conclusion. I'm not even sure if a written judgment is available. I haven't seen it yet. I just heard him live. But the reasons for his conclusion, it's of a factual nature. It's weighing the facts as he understood them to be, taking all the affidavits into consideration. He arrived at that conclusion. She had consented to her deportation to South Africa.
So if she had consented, and that's the finding, very difficult to appeal a ruling like that, I would imagine.
Well, it's a factual matter. It's a factual matter. In the Mohammed case of 2001, that was an issue also that was writ large, except over there he was facing the death penalty in the United States, and the court thought even the version of the state that he had consented and accepted the version that he had consented, but how could he have consented to going back to face the death penalty? Obviously, he wasn't properly informed of the consequences of any consent, and I think there might be a similarity over here. She might have consented, but did she consent in an informed way? And maybe this is what Dr. Nandipha's legal team is going to look very closely at.
Throughout this entire application, there's something that I just don't understand, and I'm not a legal person, which is what her remedy would be. So as I understand it, she was saying that the decision to remove her from Tanzania was wrong, that there was illegality there. Now, normally, again, as I understand it, if you win a court application, the clock is turned back. You're put in the same position you were in before the illegal action, which would mean that she would be returned to Tanzania, a country, again, as I understand it, she entered illegally. So, again, Tanzania would just deport her, and she would come back home and no doubt be met by our authorities here. Was there a problem with your application there, that there's no real remedy available to her?
Well, the real remedy available to her, had the judge decided in her favor, and he said as much, the magistrate's court, who wishes to try her on a number of charges, would have no criminal jurisdiction to do so. She would have walked free. So had, for example, it was found by the judge that there was no consent, he would have been liable to find her standing before a court with no jurisdiction to try her, and that would have liberated her. That was the remedy she had prayed for, and that was the available remedy to her. And if Judge Lopsa had to have arrived at that conclusion, she would have walked free.
There would have been a huge outcry. I mean, the evidence against her is fairly strong from what I understand. Sure, maybe there have been issues with the arrest, but I think there would have been a huge outcry from people in society if that had been the case.
Remember, Judge Philip Lopsa in 2018 was the judge responsible for freeing 250 million rands of assets back to the Gupta brothers. Not politically acceptable to many different people, but this particular judge is a courageous judge and very independently minded, and therefore we were expecting him on a rule of law basis itself, and this is what Dr. Nandipha's legal team was arguing, he should find in her favor. But again, it was that hole in the cheese he found in the full context of facts that she had consented, and that is an exception to the rule.
The whole idea of our government sending someone to fetch two people, so Thabo Bester and Dr. Nandipha Magudumana, is that a problem for government in this case? Because I've never heard of that before. I've never heard of us sending a plane in that kind of way. I understand, Bester is someone who's been a convicted murderer, and he must take that very seriously. He must face the rule of law, and if he escaped from our prison, we should extend every effort to get him back. But in her case, the fact that we sent a plane, is that always going to be a little bit of a problem for government legally?
I don't think it's always going to be a problem for government. It really depends on the circumstances. And for example, if extradition did ensue properly, if the process that should have taken place did take place, at the end of the day, if she would have been surrendered by the Minister of Justice of Tanzania in terms of the extradition treaty between the two countries, South Africa could well have sent a plane to collect her, and that would have been an entirely legal exercise. In this particular case, the judge found against her on the basis of her consent, and that justifies an aeroplane. And for the Minister of Home Affairs to have sent an aeroplane at a tremendous cost, I think over R1 million, it was to protect, in the Minister's words, the sovereignty of South Africa, the exercise of the state's sovereignty. And to the Minister, that was what this was all about from beginning to end.
Gary Eisenberg, thank you. Immigration lawyer and expert on extradition. I really do.